Past, Present, and Future with producer Alan Sandler in 1974, and Sandler also did work for the CIA. They showed this illustration in their book. Emenegger later told me face to face that this illustration was sketched directly from a 16mm film frame that was shot when the EBENS landed at Holloman Air Force Base in a formal meeting with our military representatives. That ET and human meeting was also described to me by others, including retired Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, who said the actual meeting site was further north, inside White Sands Missile Range near the Trinity site. That name, Archon-Like, given by U.S. government insiders, probably relates to that ancient Greek word archon, meaning ruler or lord, and here on the left is an Archon-Like big-nosed gray in a ropey headdress, vertical pupil eyes, huge bent nose, holding a telepathic communication rod at, I think it's White Sands. Others have said Holloman Air Force Base, but the date, I think everyone agrees, was April 25th, 1964, when the U.S. government had a meeting with EBENS and an Archon-Like. On the right, carved in ancient stone, is the Sumerian sun god Shamash, also in a ropey headdress as depicted in Sumerian clay images. The eyes have large vertical pupils like a cat or an alligator. The coiled rod is described as a communication device, implying that rods in Sumerian and Egyptian carvings were communication devices. They were used by Archon-Like to manage and control the human creations and workers specifically placed in Mesopotamia. If the March 1981 President Reagan briefing is an accurate transcript, then the very advanced EBENS turned Earth into a social experiment very long ago. But evolving primates were deliberately kept ignorant of the true bigger picture. Government insiders who caught on to what is really happening, they might be running scared. Perhaps they have come to understand that the Mesopotamian overlords were actually Archon-Like, that humans worshipped as Sumerian or Anunnaki gods. Those rapid cycle clone biological entities were made by EBENS according to the Reagan briefing. And how ironic that the EBENS made the Archon-Like and then made Homo sapiens sapien, who worshipped the Archon-Like. Why did the EBENS put the big-nosed Archon-Like in charge of this planet Earth social experiment? A third type of ET listed in the President Reagan briefing at Camp David are called quadloids. The EBENS also genetically engineered these quadloids by hybridizing praying mantis and lizard-like creatures according to the briefing. And quad in Latin means four. So perhaps they are referring in that name to the fact that these entities have only 4 fingers and 4 toes. EBENS allegedly placed these genetically engineered creatures on a planet in the Zeta Reticuli binary solar system. A fourth type are called heptaloids. No details are given about characteristics, but hepla in Latin means 7. Could it be that these are some of the tall entities with white skin? They are allegedly from the planet Damco near the Cygnus arm in a solar system that contains 11 planets, and Damco is described as the 4th planet out from that sun. The 5th on the list are the Trantaloids, called the dangerous ones, and also known in the government as hostile alien visitors, or HAVs. They are allegedly from the 3rd planet in Epsilon Eridani's solar system that is 10.5 light years from Earth. And this information is from this web transcript that everybody can go to at www.serpo.org. Now, returning to a piece of the actual transcript of this briefing for President Ronald Reagan in early March of 1981. One of the advisors from NSA, NRO, DIA, the intelligence groups, is named advisor number 4, and he says, "Mr. President, the Trantaloids have strange materials, nothing like those found on Earth. And these aliens can imitate humans. They can look like blonde humans. However, they are not blonde. They are ugly-looking insects. But they have the ability to change their bodies. They are 1,000 years ahead of us in technology and probably every other science. Their spaceships have a force field around them. They can be shot down, but it takes some doing on our part. We know, or we can recognize their language, which is entirely different than the EBENS. They use a very high band radio system, but they have different frequencies, and it is difficult for NSA, the National Security Agency, to track them. So according to the Serpo leaks, the big picture is EBENS with their genetically created big-nosed archoloids, four-fingered praying mantis, and lizard quadloids, plus perhaps some type of tall haploids. But apparently, the EBENS warned us about the dangerous insect Trantaloids from Epsilon Eridani. All these ETs are very skilled with making cloned biological entities, including the assertion that the EBENS also made Homo sapiens sapien, our current container model of humanity. EBENS genetically create all kinds of organic containers with DNA manipulation to do work for them on various planets, including Earth. Those EBEN-created androids have included praying mantis and reptilian humanoids. But who are the so-called blonde Swedes or Nordics? What is their relationship to the EBENS or Trantaloids? There is one startling answer, perhaps to that mystery in the President Reagan briefing in March 1981, that advisor number 4 talks in more detail about the technology of the dangerous Trantaloids. Mr. President, in their technology, which is at least 1,000 years more advanced than ours, the Trantaloids have different materials to work with. Some of their materials are not found on Earth. Maybe they have more than 104 elements that are different than ours, very strange materials. These aliens can imitate humans. They can look like blonde humans, and they are not blonde. They are ugly-looking insects. They can imitate looking like humans. So which blonde Nordics might be camouflage for insect Trantaloids that President Reagan was told were actually dangerous insects? Or are some blondes and red-haired beings trying to help android humanity, such as the Archangel Michael, who historically has fought off dragons and serpents? I was also told that about 2,500 years ago, the EBENS genetically experimented with DNA changes in humans living in Bhutan, Tibet, and Nepal. The result was that some of those altered humans were transplanted to Central America, specifically the Mayans, that were related to that genetic experimentation. And that comes from a Washington source. My Washington military source back in 1983, who told me that the EBENS made us and put us here, they watch us live and grow. They've been here since at least the time of the dinosaur origin, some 250 million years ago, maybe older. He told me that he had read a government classified report that the EBENS collected one of each species of dinosaur and placed them either in one big planetary zoo or on different planets. I asked him what happened that caused almost total annihilation of Earth life, including the wipeout of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. And this is what he said, quote, I read in the Yellow Book that an Eben three-dimensional history of Earth shows that the Ebens knew back then, 65 million years ago, that a very large asteroid was going to hit the Earth. The Ebens wrote that they were saving one of each species that was on this planet, not just the dinosaurs, but the ants, insects, flies, snakes, fish. The Ebens said they took one of everything to save all the species before the asteroid hit. So I said, it's a Noah's Ark rescue story. And he said, that's right. And I guess they've experimented with life forms here on Earth ever since. But what bothers us is that the Ebens can do most anything they want. They could have evaporated that asteroid, even if it was big. But they didn't. Does that mean the Ebens wanted to get rid of their dinosaur experiment? And what came next was the rise of mammals. Humans are primate mammals. And the question we both talked about without a clear answer was, would the Ebens save us humans now if a big asteroid was headed for Earth?
Increasingly in this particular period, starting after World War II, the government started to see the advantages of secrecy and propaganda.
Well, some presidents, though, were told, like Nixon.
Nixon was given some level of briefing.
They let him in on this.
If the Gleason story, Jackie Gleason's story is true, he even had access to some of the material, maybe even the bodies.
Right.
And Gleason said, and this has never been
That's a homestead.
disproven.
Tell us that story.
And his wife confirmed it. Jackie Gleason,
who
who knew Reagan and they played golf together, asked him, Gleason
knew Nixon.
Asked Nixon rather. Nixon knew that Gleason had this huge UFO library, and he was totally into it. And he'd ask him about it when they were playing golf. And one day, President Nixon said, let me show you something.
Get in the car.
And Gleason talked about this. He talked about it to Shirley MacLaine. Shirley MacLaine confirmed this to me, personally. So there's another example. And
the story is, though, that Nixon took Jackie Gleason to Homestead Air Force Base in Florida.
Yeah.
And Nixon was driving the car. He's the president. He's driving the car. And the guy at the gate goes, oh, my God, it's the president. Lets them in and shows them an alien, like in a
dead
jar, a dead alien. And apparently Jackie Gleason was in shock.
I'm sure he was. I'm sure the guy at the gate didn't know what the president was taking him to.
There?
I mean, he didn't know. So it's like, okay, the president's going to be able to get in, and once he gets in. So he was having a little fun that night. And this is, if it wasn't about extraterrestrials and the world wasn't in the situation it is, it's all kind of funny. But for those that want to know the full story, about most of everything we know about the connection between presidents and this issue is the work of Grant Cameron, and that is presidentialufo.com. He's a Canadian, and he did a tremendous service for us.
Job.
Huge amount of material there, including a great deal about the Clinton connection through the Rockefeller Initiative. And so there's this dance that's been going on between the Pentagon and the president and the public and the media, and they just, here, there, and whatever. And it's no longer, I think, the music needs to stop. All right, we've been playing musical chairs with this issue for 70 years, including presidents.
Pulling out the chair.
The music needs to stop. This is too serious. And the implications not only of this reality, but the sequestered technologies that they have been working on and re-engineering for 70 years, they're not available to the public domain. Anti-gravitic propulsion is not available to us, and the energy system in those craft is not available. And we're starting to learn enough about it to know if that technology were brought out, we could solve some major problems, the kinds of problems that stop terrorism and wars.
Yeah.
But the truth embargo remains, and that technology must be sequestered, because if they brought it out, they know the truth embargo ends. Two more things just happened, then a blockbuster, all right? Matthew Bellamy, who is the head guy of the supergroup Muse, told the story. He said, I believe I'm an abductee. I had a sighting. I had a full day of missing time, and I think I'm an abductee. And Muse, interesting, and this is notable because Muse, and I think he wrote this song, came out with a song about 8 or 9 years ago called Exopolitics. It starts off with When the Zetas Fill the Sky. So that's Matthew Bellamy, a gentleman by the name of Rupert Matthew in the UK, who has written a half a dozen serious books on the extraterrestrial issue, including abduction, was just elected to the House of Commons. He's
something you tried to do.
He's a member of Parliament,
ago.
right? Didn't create a problem for him.
Yeah.
But then here's the big one, right? And why I'm so glad I'm doing this show right now. And this is a major event. It may be the biggest event in the disclosure process and the advocacy since the citizen hearing in 2013. Robert Bigelow founded an organization to investigate this phenomenon in 1995, 3 years before he actually launched Bigelow Aerospace.
Okay.
So he's already investigating this issue through a group called the National Institute of Discovery Science, with some high-level people on it and the board and so forth. But then he gets into the aerospace thing in 1998. All right. He has a dream. He wants to put habitats in space. He's quite serious. And he's a billionaire.
Floating hotels. In
2000, I think it was 2000 or early 2001, he got the chance to make this big move because NASA had to, during that .com implosion, funding went down. They had to cut that program on flexible habitats. And he bought all the rights and went into engaged NASA in contracts.
He's doing it himself.
And now, even though he was into the ET issue, which I'm sure made a lot of people at NASA a little nervous, but hey, he's going to put the money in it. He's going to do it. No problem. So he buys the rights and starts putting millions of dollars into research in space habitats. NIDS remains open until 2004. Later on, he gets involved in MUFON for a while, doing some research, put some money in there. NASA, no problem. Yeah. No problem. Probably because, again, he's not pressing us politically, and he's putting all his money in. No big deal. Okay, fine. Now, another 8-9 years go by. He's put $300 million in, and finally,
his own money.
Finally, the first major breakthrough for Robert Bigelow of Las Vegas comes when NASA agrees to test one of his inflatable habitats on the space station. Now, this is a big deal, right?
Huge.
Naturally, it's also worthy of a 60 Minutes interview.
Yep.
Is he was provided the general topics. He wasn't given the questions, and he certainly didn't provide 60 Minutes the answers to anything in advance. But they have to know the general topics so the person can reflect on it and they have a proper
and be
interview.
A little ready for it.
And so Laura, the very nice lady named Laura Logan, she starts the interview and they talk about his space program and his habitat work and the research. Who has put his
involved in the
heart
space program.
Involved in the space, with 3 contracts with NASA. He's been a NASA contractor since 2000, right? He's just had the greatest moment of his life in terms of that work. They've put it up on the ISS. And now he's asked a question about his ET interest, which he's had plenty of time to think about.
Right. Could have denied it.
He could have done anything.
Yeah.
Instead, he literally lays it out there. And she didn't expect this answer. Robert Bigelow is a serious man. He knows there's an ET presence. He put millions of dollars into his own research. He's not just somebody that read a few books. He is doing space habitat development, which was as applicable whether you have any kind of propulsion. And it's solid research, and it could be very, very helpful. And he knows full well that if this truth embargo had ended 10 years ago, we'd probably have hotels around the moon right now. His work would be fully manifest. And so this truth embargo is driving him crazy, right? And finally, he'd had enough. And so when given the opportunity on one of the most watched shows in television,
credible,
one of the oldest running shows in all of television, he says flat out there's an extraterrestrial presence. And when asked if he's worried people think he's crazy, he says, I don't give a damn. That message was to Spielberg and Lucas and Cameron and Musk and Bezos and Branson, these multi-hundred-million billionaires who have been involved in this issue forever. SpaceX, movies, films, and he's basically saying, will you guys, I'm going to try to use the right phrase here, will you show a little gumption? Will you speak some truth to power? Yeah, because if those gentlemen, who I am sure are concerned, and may have even been told, you got a great life, you're worth $1 billion, you're making great money.
That's right.
You don't want to mess with us on this issue. Make your films, but don't get into the advocacy mode. Don't go political on us. Maybe they've been threatened. And basically saying, it's 2017, guys. They're not going to
But Bigelow doesn't care.
He doesn't. They're not going to kidnap your children. Speak up. And you know what would happen if a Spielberg and a Bezos or a Branson were to come out and say, "Look, there's an ET presence. I got tipped off on that 20 years ago."
Huge.
It would force disclosure probably within a week.
Yep.
And it would be a little more chaotic than the president being able to kind of surprise us. It would create an enormous firestorm. But that's what I was trying to do with the Clinton campaign, and we came that close. And so that's a major event. And Bob Bigelow went down in history right in that moment. I don't care what he does with the space research. That event was significant, and I hope Robert understands what he did there.
I think he knows.
I hope so.
I think he knows.
Look, in the 20 years I've been in this, I've had everything come across my radar screen, and most of it is nonsense. Right now, we're really buried in nonsense. It's coming up because of all the excitement. Yeah. Space colonies on Mars making it the level of CNN. God help it. And I dismiss a great deal. I know enough to believe that Bob Lazar's core story is true, and he paid a heavy price for that story. And I hope that Bob hangs around long enough to see the vindication of his effort to talk about something very important a little ahead of time.
It was way ahead of time.
I believe when he first comes out, the Cold War is still underway. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. It was in the 80s, wasn't it?
I think, yeah, absolutely.
And so he's
with our colleague George Knapp.
Exactly. And so he paid a price. After the Cold War ends, it's different. There's been almost no significant harassment of any witnesses really since 2002,
no, you're
2004.
Right. You're right.
But Bob was early. He got ahead of his skis. And all I can say is, Bob, you know, you did what you could. Is that stuff still at Area 51? No, I think they moved it long ago. But he's not the only one.
Maybe even before he started talking about it, they moved it.
Possibly. He's not the only one, though, that has come out with information along those lines. You know, some high-level people like Admiral Lord Hill Norton have also talked about, there's a whole list of quotes you can find from pretty high-level people going back years. But Paul Hellyer, former Defense Minister of Canada, Deputy Prime Minister, was brought into the issue by Victor Viggiani in 2005 at a presentation at the university in Toronto. And I was there, and this man is an amazing guy. He's a devout Christian. He's upright as he could be. He's a legend in politics. And he was like 88.
And he's honest.
And he decided, you know, I'm going to get into this. And now look, he has tried to get up to speed on this huge, vast issue, and he's gotten in some areas that probably won't necessarily hold up. But the core thing was this. He read the book after Roswell by Burns and Corso, and then he had some contacts. He was the defense minister during the Vietnam War. He called up some of his contacts in the U.S., some of the Army generals, and they confirmed it. And that was enough for him to go, okay, damn it, it's time these people knew this.
See, I put him in the category of the Edgar Mitchells, the late Apollo 14 astronaut.
Yeah.
People who are in the know, credible people who deal with people in government. And they come out with stories.
And every time one of them dies, I feel a pretty big pang.
We lose something.
Well, they didn't live to see this end. Look, when you've got people like Edgar Mitchell and Gordon Cooper, Jesse Marcel are gone, and these would normally be great heroes. These would normally be very, very significant people, and they have all been diminished. Yeah. Because they touched the ET subject and got tossed into the intellectual ghetto that the government created to embargo this issue. And when great men and women like that are demeaned, should be a message to the people in government. It's time to end this game. It is time to tell the truth, or we'll continue to have to diminish great people because the truth embargo uber all.
The first time that someone tried to put the baffling puzzle pieces of other life in the universe together for me in a more coherent picture was October 1983. That's when I was still trying to go forward with the HBO project in spite of government efforts to block me. A Washington, D.C. military source who claimed first-hand interaction with at least one type of non-human agreed to talk with me off the record about the type that he knew as extraterrestrial biological entities, also known as EBENS. He was aware that on April 9, 1983, at Kirtland Air Force Base, I was shown an alleged briefing document for an unnamed U.S. president, And it said extraterrestrial biological entities, or EBENS, have manipulated DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapien. The military source told me that was true. But he stressed that no one in the American government with access to that knowledge ever wanted to be alive if or when such an announcement were broadcast to the world that humans are someone else's experimental androids. He told me that he had talked firsthand with a U.S. Air Force captain who received telepathic communication from one non-human at a crash site in the Roswell region. He said 1949, not 1947. Because the captain, more than anyone else at the crash site, could clearly and correctly receive mind-to-mind communication from the non-human and Eben. The captain was assigned to live with this entity called EBA-1 at the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico until EBA died of unknown causes on June 18, 1952. That Air Force captain said one of the most important transmissions that he ever received from this Eben was, quote, "We made you, we put you here on Earth, but you have to live it," close quote. I typed up notes after the October 18, 1983 meeting that began with this military source talking about information gained from EBA-1 and another captured being called EBA-2. Here are some brief excerpts from my October 1983 notes in Washington, D.C. October 18th, EBA-2, trying to teach human scientists about their Eben technology. They use a completely different set of physical laws than ours. Our physics would not apply in their civilization, but theirs can apply in ours. They, the EBENS, travel interdimensionally many times faster than the speed of light, like the corner of a napkin folded to its opposite corner. There are many dimensions, two of which we might relate to, but at least a dozen dimensions we would not relate to. All EBENS look alike. Their society is worldwide on a planet in the Zeta Reticuli binary solar system about 39 light years from Earth. Hive minds, all telepathic. Leaders are for life. Even though they look pretty much the same, there are personality differences. The EBENS brought 5 different humanoid species, he said to me, juvenile delinquents possibly, from somewhere else in the cosmos to this planet Earth a long time ago. Our whole planet is a sociological experiment, according to this whistleblower. That's why the EBENS persist in the so-called guardian role versus the renegade blonde Swedes, Nordics, and other ET types. Are there secret wars ongoing to protect humans that are kept in a state of ignorance? He said the problem is if the EBENS go away from Earth, what will happen? They have a computer base inside of our moon and throughout our solar system, he said. Is that sufficient monitoring to keep the blonde Swedes, reptilians, and others in check? He said the Swedes, quote, have a large menagerie of cloned biological entities, close quote, which do work for them everywhere. He talked to me about the presidents and what they knew. He said Truman, 1945 to 1953, knew everything at the time. And then Ike, 1953 to 1961, knew everything but put a lid on it. Then came Kennedy, 1961 to 1963. He wanted to tell the whole world about the alien presence and was killed in Dallas on November 22, 1963, for trying to open up the truth. LBJ, 1963 to 69. He did not want to know because he heard rumors about what happened to Kennedy. Nixon, 1969 to 1974. Knew and bragged about his inside knowledge to friends. showed Jackie Gleason some retrieved craft and ET bodies preserved in tubes hanging on walls underground at Eglin Air Force Base near Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Ford, 1974 to 1977, the whistleblower said he did not know if he was ever briefed on anything. Jimmy Carter, 1977 to 1981, briefed in 1976 and again later on, but decided the story was too big to deal with. Ronald Reagan, 1981 to 1989. He was briefed during the campaign because he was so pro-military that MJ-12 wanted to quiet him down a little. And then he was briefed in March 1981 after the election by CIA director, with CIA, DIA, NSA, and NRO advisors present. And about that word, reincarnation, he said that the EBENS described this, quote, only so many souls are allowed per planet, close quote. They are recycled constantly at birth and death. But why? After that conversation, I didn't know who to trust or what to believe in 1983. So I didn't do anything public with this Washington, D.C. military sources information. Then a decade later, an alleged 1950s government document was leaked on March 7, 1994. This is its title, quote, Restricted Psalm 101 Majestic 12 Group Special Operations Manual. Extraterrestrial entities and technology, recovery and disposal, top secret magic, eyes only, warning. This is a top secret magic eyes only document containing compartmentalized information essential to the national security of the United States. Eyes only access to the material herein is strictly limited to personnel possessing Magic 12 clearance level. Examination or use by unauthorized personnel is strictly forbidden and is punishable by federal law. Since the U.S. War Office was transitioned to the U.S. Department of the Army under the Department of Defense in 1949, the implication is that this Psalm 101 training manual for extraterrestrial entities in technology, recovery, and disposal was first produced before 1949 and updated in April 1954. The unofficial leak of this Psalm 101 manual started at a La Crosse, Wisconsin pharmacy when 32 pages of text and drawings showed up on 35mm negative film addressed to Don Berliner at the Fund for UFO Research in Maryland. The film was in an envelope postmarked March 7, 1994. Don Berliner gave Bob Wood, an aerospace engineer retiring from McDonnell Douglas, permission to print the negatives for study. The first negative frame was the Psalm 101 cover. Then on page 6 of the training manual is section 10, Description of Extraterrestrial Biological Entities, EBE Type 1 and EBE Type 2. EBE Type 1. These entities are humanoid and might be mistaken for human beings of the Oriental race, if seen from a distance. They are bipedal, 5 feet to 5 feet 4 inches in height, and weigh 80 to 100 pounds. Proportionally, they are similar to humans, although the cranium is somewhat larger and more rounded. The skin is a pale, chalky yellow in color, thick and slightly pebbled in appearance. This was odd to read, because the gray EBENS and other gray types are not described by people, let's say, in the human abduction or a whistleblower as chalky yellow in color. Is this yet another type or something related to the metabolism of the EBENS? I'm now showing a charcoal illustration that a government whistleblower told me, quote, is almost like a photograph of an EBEN, the acronym the U.S. government uses for extraterrestrial biological entities. The Psalm 101 manual continues, quote, the eyes are small, wide-set, almond-shaped, with brownish black irises with very large pupils. The whites of the eyes are not like that of humans, but have a pale gray cast. The ears are small and set low on the skull. The nose is thin and long, and the mouth is wider than in humans and nearly lipless. There is no apparent facial hair and very little body hair, that being very fine and confined to the underarm and the groin area. The body is thin and without apparent body fat, but the muscles are well developed. The hands are small with 4 long digits, but no opposable thumb. The outside digit is jointed in a manner as to be nearly opposable, and there is no webbing between the fingers as there is in humans. The legs are slightly but noticeably bowed, and the feet are somewhat splayed and proportionally large. A second type on page 6 of the Psalm 101 manual states, EBA type 2. These smaller entities are humanoid but differ from type 1 in many respects. They are bipedal, 3 feet 5 inches to 4 feet 2 inches in height and weigh 25 to 50 pounds. Proportionally, the head is much larger than humans or type 1 EBAs, the cranium being much larger and elongated. The eyes are very large, slanted, and nearly wrap around the side of the skull. They are black with no white showing. There is no noticeable brow ridge, and the skull has a slight peak that runs over the crown. The nose consists of only 2 small slits, which sit high above the slit-like mouth. There are no external ears. The skin is a pale bluish-gray color, being somewhat darker on the back of the creature and is very smooth and fine-celled. There is no hair on either the face or the body, and these creatures do not appear to be mammalian. The arms are long in proportion to the legs, and the hands have 3 long tapering fingers and a thumb, which is nearly as long as the fingers. The second finger is thicker than the other, but not as long as the index finger. The feet are small and narrow, and 4 toes are joined together inside a membrane. Would a membrane around 4 toes explain tracks at animal mutilation sites where ranchers and law enforcement have described hoof-like tracks or ice cream cone-shaped tracks? It is not definitely known where either type of creature originated, but it seems certain that they did not evolve on Earth. It is further evident, although not certain, that they may have originated on 2 different planets, close quote. And this is from the Psalm 101 training manual. Today, I can add the probability that EBA-1 types genetically manufactured EBA type 2s to do work on this planet. That means abductees have usually been handled by the small, large, black-eyed little guys, not the prime Eben intelligence behind the genetically cloned biological entities or androids. The concept of cloned biological entities of various types, made by EBENS and other extraterrestrial types, has emerged in more details about 5 different non-human species allegedly presented in a briefing for U.S. President Ronald Reagan. This Release 27A, Reagan briefing, was included in a series of 35 reports from 2005 to 2007, posted in order, quote, to facilitate the gradual release of confidential documents pertaining to a top-secret exchange program of 12 U.S. military personnel to Serpo, a planet of Zeta Reticuli, and this happened between the years 1965 to 1978. The information began to be released on 2 November 2005 by a retired senior official within the United States Defense Intelligence Agency. He calls himself anonymous. Until he chooses to make his name known, this is the way he will be represented here. Anonymous reports that he is not acting individually and is part of a group of 6 DIA personnel working together as an alliance of 3 current and 3 former Defense Intelligence Agency employees. He is their chief spokesman, close quote. The following excerpts are allegedly from a transcript of a tape recording made at Camp David, Maryland, for President Ronald Reagan on March 6 and March 8, 1981, about the subject of, quote, unidentified flying objects and extraterrestrial visitation of Earth, close quote. Leading the discussion was CIA Director William Casey, along with CIA advisors and a caretaker of the ET history. Casey was Reagan's campaign manager in 1980. And then President Reagan asked Casey to become CIA director from 1981 to 1987. That means this briefing, March 6 to 8, 1981, was only 2 months after Ronald Reagan first took office on January 20th, 1981 as President of the United States. I begin with excerpts from the presidential briefing as the anonymous caretaker speaks to President Reagan. Quote, the United States of America has been visited by extraterrestrial visitors since 1947. We have proof of that, close quote. My own note is that the truth about crashes, that we appear to have history of a crash retrieval 6 years before Roswell events, and that was in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, allegedly in the first part of 1941, and discussed in leaked Majestic 12 documents, from which a, quote, neutronic propulsion device was retrieved and later delivered to Robert Oppenheimer when he began work at Los Alamos, New Mexico, to produce the first American atomic bomb. The caretaker says, however, we also have some proof that Earth has been visited for many thousands of years by various races of extraterrestrial visitors. Mr. President, I'll just refer to those visitors as ETs. In July 1947, a remarkable event occurred in New Mexico. During a storm, 2 ET spacecraft crashed. One crashed southwest of Corona, New Mexico, and one crashed near Dadle, New Mexico. The U.S. Army eventually found both sites and recovered all of the debris and one live alien. I'll refer to this live alien as EBA-1. What does that mean? Do we have codes or a special terminology for this? President Reagan asked. Mr. President, EBA means extraterrestrial biological entity. It was a code designated to this creature by the U.S. Army back in those days. This creature was not human, and we had to decide on a term for it. So scientists designated the creature as EBA-1. We also referred to it as NOAA. There was different terminology used by various aspects of the U.S. military and intelligence community back then. Can we classify them? Can we connect them with anything earthly? No, Mr. President. They don't have any similar characteristics of a human, with the exception that they have eyes, ears, and a mouth. Their internal body organs are different. Their skin is entirely different from human. We could not classify any part of the aliens with humans. They had blood and skin, although considerably different than human skin. Their eyes had 2 different eyelids, probably because their home planet was very bright. Is time the same on their planet as on ours? No, Mr. President. Time is very different on the Eben planet, which, by the way, we call Serpo. When you look in Latin and you find the word Serpo, it means to creep or crawl. Perhaps they meant like a snake. Their day is approximately 40 hours. That is measured by the movement of their 2 suns. The solar system containing Serpo is a binary star system, 2 suns, rather than the 1 sun like our solar system. The distance from Earth to Serpo is about 40 light years. They can travel that in about 9 months of our time. I am no scientist, but as I mentioned earlier, they can travel that great distance by means of space tunnels. They seem to be able to bend the distance from one point in space to another. Just how they do this must be explained scientifically. Are they all friendly? Advisor number 1. Mr. President, that is a very difficult question to answer. There are many parameters that we follow to evaluate the threat. However, we have little intelligence on 4 of the 5 visitors. We have plenty of intel on the EBENS. They've given us everything we've asked for. They have also helped us to understand the other 4 species. I'm afraid to say, Mr. President, and please don't misunderstand my words, but we think one of the species is very hostile. William Casey, CIA Director. Mr. President, we have intelligence that would indicate this one species of aliens have abducted people from Earth. They have performed scientific and medical tests on these humans. To the best of our knowledge, no humans have been killed, but as Advisor Number 1 stated, the intelligence is from witnesses and we haven't thoroughly evaluated this intelligence. We have captured one of these hostile aliens. This gets into some very, very sensitive areas, Mr. President. I strongly suggest we end this discussion and move on to any further questions that you might have and then get back to this. I don't think we are prepared to provide you with accurate answers to your questions about the potentially hostile aliens at this time, close quote. And that was March 6 to 8, 1981. President Reagan said, okay, but expect this to be given to me as soon as possible. I want to know everything about these hostile creatures. So, we should start forming policies on how to deal with them. Advisor Number 1, do we have operational war plans on this? Advisor Number 1, yes, Mr. President, we have war plans on all potential threats to our country. William Casey, okay, give the President the names, caretaker. Okay, thank you, Mr. President. The 5 non-human species are called EBENS, Archon-Like, Quadloids, Heplaloids, and Trantaloids. These names were given to the alien species by the intelligence community, specifically by MJ5. The EBENS are friendly. The Trantaloids are the dangerous ones. We call the hostile aliens simply that, HAV, meaning hostile alien visitors. MJ12 placed that code on them back as early in the 1950s. A note about MJ5. A member of Majestic or Majority 12, also known as MJ12, is this group that was originally organized in September 1947 after the July 1947 Roswell and other UFO crash incidents. That's when President Harry Truman organized MJ12 as a secret committee of scientists, military leaders, businessmen, and government officials under an executive order to monitor and analyze the interactions of non-human intelligences with Earth and to organize back engineering of advanced ET technologies retrieved from downed ET craft. In the briefing, President Ronald Reagan said, "You mean to say these HAVs have been visiting us and kidnapping our people since the 1950s? William Casey, Mr. President, we have some indication that they might have been doing this for some time. But we can be sure that the EBENS have never done this. They are extremely peaceful and they would not harm a living soul, including animals," close quote. In contrast to what the CIA director told President Reagan, this can't be a true statement about the EBENS, because it was EBENS that abducted the Colorado couple from the Longmont Highway in November of 1980. President Reagan, "My God, just knowing we have names for these things is amazing. Which one did we capture?" William Casey, "Well, Mr. President, we have a Trantaloid, but it is dead. We captured it in 1961 in Canada, and we had it in captivity until 1962 when it died." Advisor Number 1, Mr. President, these hostile aliens are pretty sneaky. They seem to appear and disappear, which is beyond our technical understanding. They also seem to float or defy gravity. We have actual photographs of them doing this. We have a classic abduction incident that was recorded by military intelligence personnel. It happened in 1979 near a military base. President Reagan, where? Advisor number 1, in New Mexico. The caretaker. New Mexico is similar to the home planet of the EBENS. I now understand that the EBENS originally come from a desert-like planet in the binary G2 solar system Zeta 1 and 2 reticuli, and this is information that comes from abductees I've interviewed and from other government whistleblowers, and this is what they're talking about right now in this briefing with President Reagan. Those binary suns are very similar to our own yellow sun. And they say to President Reagan, quote, "Since we do not know which planet the Trantaloids came from," and then the caretaker is interrupted by advisor number 4. Advisor number 4 says, "I think we do. I think the EBENS gave us that information. We know the star group. It is close to our solar system in astronomical terms, maybe 10.5 light years away. It's on the 3rd planet of the Epsilon Eridani solar system. It's the Trantaloids, and they are actually closer to us than the EBENS are." Epsilon Eridani on the left is an orange dwarf star in the constellation Eridanus, a cooler, fainter K2V solar spectrum compared to our G2V sun. At 10.5 light years from Earth, Epsilon Eridani is in a multiple star system and has an estimated 82% of our sun's mass on the right and 74% of our sun's radius, but only 34% of our sun's luminosity. Our sun is much brighter. The Epsilon Eridani is an orange color versus our yellow sun, and it's dimmer. The Reagan briefing indicates the 3rd planet in the Epsilon Eridani solar system is the home of the hostile insect Trantaloids. Epsilon Eridani has a large ring Jupiter-like gaseous planet called Epsilon Eridani B and a probable 2nd rocky planet called Epsilon Eridani C. And it might even have a 3rd distant planet in one of 2 asteroid belts. Our solar system is underlined in red at the center of this 3-dimensional star map of our region in the Milky Way galaxy. In the lower left of our solar system is Epsilon Eridani, also underlined in red. Not far from Epsilon Eridani is Tau Ceti, underlined in red, and Tau Ceti has been referenced by people in the human abduction syndrome as a solar system also containing humanoid life. When astronomers Frank Drake and Carl Sagan in 1960 first started to look for radio signals from intelligent extraterrestrials, they turned their radio telescope on both Epsilon Eridani and Tau Ceti. But no signals were found then. President Reagan's 1981 briefers would say that is because SETI was looking in the wrong frequencies, or the very advanced Trantaloids have a way to cloak their planet. Was this Astronomy magazine cover in December 2007 another leak from government intelligence sources trying to condition the public that there is other life in our galaxy and beyond? Because they already know about the dangerous Trantaloid insect beings on a planet in the Epsilon Eridani solar system? There are more revelations upcoming in my next Truth Hunter about the 5 different extraterrestrial groups that were discussed in President Reagan's Camp David briefing. Plus, a look back to the most famous human abduction case of all time that involved alien beings from the binary star system Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. This is Linda Moulton Howe. Please stay tuned to my Truth Hunter series on Gaia for more surprises about our universe, this solar system, and the planet we live on.